Hello, everyone. I am Pamela Brewer, and welcome to M.E.S.H. This is the place where I talk to you about everything related to your mental, emotional, and social health. And why do I do that? Because those are the components of our lives every day. A lot of times we don't pay enough attention, but every day our emotional, our mental, and our social health is being impacted. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to remind you of what I am known to repeat fairly often, which is that mind reading is a terrible pursuit. Do not try to read somebody else's mind. Do not expect them to read your mind. Lots of times people say, well, you should have known. Well, but if they didn't know, they didn't know. So what's the cure to allowing yourself to think or be a part of mind reading? Ask questions. It's a really simple cure, and it really helps to avoid some potentially really avoidable challenges in relationships, both emotional and professional. Okay, I'm off that soapbox, and now I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Daphne Joseph. Daphne, welcome to M.E.S.H.
Thank you for having me.
Daphne, you were a distribution. I'm going to read your like 2 seconds of your bio because it was sort of like overwhelming to me. It's got lots of big words, so bear with me. You were a distribution operations supervisor with the Estee Lauder companies. I'm impressed. And you directed a team of over 30 employees to meet daily productivity goals and identify processes for improvement. And then you moved into a position coordinating inventory and working to improve digital processes for a restaurant supply e-commerce giant. Yikes. That sounds like a lot of work. Is that a lot of work? It sounds hard.
Yeah, you know what? It's my education, and so very quickly, I'll give a little on that. I got into supply chain with a little bit of a passion actually for sustainable and edible planting. While I was in school, I found myself pregnant with my son, and so when I graduated, that affected a little bit my plans. So I kind of just took the first job that sounded really good with a good company, and it happened to be the Estee Lauder companies. And I have to say, I loved the job. It was it hard? Yes. I think working there advanced me very quickly because you're just thrown into so much.
Mhm.
Me at the time, I was a student. I was a Perkins server, and I went straight from that life to managing a team. So I had a lot of uh, self reflection to do to get myself to the place of I'm doing this, even though I don't have the confidence yet because of my son. But over time, you grow that, you get into it, and you evolve, and it starts a beautiful career for you.
Well, you said Perkins. You mean the restaurant, the Perkins restaurant?
Yes, the
I think
Perkins Diner restaurant.
I think I remember that. But I gotta say, to my way of thinking, a huge leap between that and working at Estee Lauder doing the work that you were doing. So you heard me say a moment ago that every part of our lives every day is affected by our mental, emotional, and social health. What was
Hmm.
going on in your head that said to you, despite the challenges, you were pregnant, you were in school, so there's that whole piece. What was going on in your head? Would you tell yourself that allowed you to say, yeah, I'm going to go do this and then go do it? How'd you do
Yeah.
that?
So I'll be really honest. In contrast with, I think, a lot of the things that motivate me today and push me through experiences, especially in business, that are a little scary at first. At the time, I was almost purely driven by fear. I did not want my son to have the same life I had growing up. I wanted him to have better, and I felt like there were a lot of important pieces to how I made the jump from server to distribution operations supervisor. It was systematic for sure, but ultimately, in terms of what was going on mentally, it wasn't necessarily a healthy thought process. It was, I have to do this because this is a hand given opportunity.
Yes.
And if I don't take this and at least try to succeed, I'll always look back and think, I let an opportunity to propel myself forward in life for me and my son slip through my fingers.
You just use the word fear, and that's such an important concept because so many times I hear people say, I think we all hear people say, well, I didn't do it because I was afraid, or I'm going to wait until I'm not afraid and then I'll try it. And people often think about the concept of fear as this bad thing that has to be overcome. And what I would like to suggest, and certainly what I hear in you, you were afraid. Makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't you be afraid? I would have been nervous if you said you weren't afraid. I'd be, well, why isn't she afraid? What's up with that? Fear is not the problem if you let it stop you. Fear is really human. It's really, I don't know what else to say. It's really human. But if it stops you, that's when you get some challenges, and doesn't mean you can't resolve them. But fear in and of itself is a very human, very normal, very natural emotion. So you were in school, you had your child, you had this really big job. I'm going to guess you had like maybe 9 to 5, maybe you had benefits, maybe you had a regular salary at the end of some period of time, sort of like most people's dream, particularly if you have a child. What on earth allowed you or led you or drove you to leave that and become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty straightforward reasoning. I loved the job. It was a distribution center, so 24 hours, and that's pretty representative of the supply chain industry across all different pieces, transportation, fulfillment centers, which are very much like distribution centers. And so for me, I was on second shift, which was started at 11, and I think ended at 10 or something like that.
Oh,
And
AM or PM?
11 a.m. Or
Okay.
I mean, that's when I would get up in the morning. The
Okay.
shift ended at 10. I believe it started at 4 or 4 to 12. I'm stretching my memory a little bit here. Um, and I'd get home around 1. I'd start my day around 11. I'd be out the door around 1. And so I think the reason I look at it like that is because that's about all the time I would see my son for the day.
Ah,
Uh,
not
because
very
I'd be
tall. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd get home at 1 or so. I'd do a little bit. I'd be asleep at 4, and so that's kind of like how I looked at my day. And then on top of that, we had mandatory overtime on weekends, and so it was also about an hour away from my house. So the typical day was a 12-hour window, just commuting and doing my shift and getting there early to, kind of
Yeah.
prepare.
Yeah.
Plus overtime that brings you up to 60 some odd hours. And that's if you're just working a Saturday, could be on a Saturday and a Sunday. So it just wasn't giving me the life balance I wanted. So I started working for this restaurant supply e-com giant. It is a company that is just rapidly expanding. They've kind of pioneered how they handle the restaurant supply industry, just in changing the mode from, okay, here are vendor specialists, you talk with them, they'll make the sale, to you can order an oven online and get it delivered to your door. And so they blew up really fast, and I thought that was super cool. And ignored some red flags on Glassdoor in terms of their lack of diversity, and
Okay.
coming from Estee Lauder, which was very diverse. And
Okay.
in fact, diversity was because we were so diverse, it was a normal part of conversation.
Gotcha.
Um, to completely the opposite.
Okay.
Was a little bit more of a culture shock than I was expecting.
Hmm.
And ultimately their culture was so important to them, their corporate culture, that I
Uh,
just did not I wasn't aware of the shows they watched, the music they liked. And so they looked at that as me not participating, and it just so many things along that line. But the biggest piece, the piece why I said I'm going to start my own business, is they made it harder for me to be a mom than my job at Estee Lauder.
wow.
Estee Lauder passionately supported mothers. And while you did have to show up at work and you couldn't work from home, and my job with this e-com restaurant supply company was remote and was from home, they wanted you to sit at your desk, for 8 hours straight. and you had to have paid childcare unless you were married. If you were married, you didn't have to prove anything. So,
Wow.
it was kind of up to you. And because, they knew I wasn't married, they knew I had no one else in the home. My son was never allowed to appear on camera. I would get written up, right? But married moms were allowed to have them. They were also allowed to get flexible schedules around parenting. It was like they just supported that more.
So
And
you were blessed for being a single parent.
yeah, and me being me, I wrote a research report for them, and there were other things. I see a problem, and that was supported at Estee Lauder. I think it got in my head that at work, if you see a problem, research it, present it, and we'll take a look. I did the same thing at that company, and they didn't like that so much. So I said, this I made the move to be a better mom. It's
Yeah.
not conducive to that. I said I've got to be able to take my skills here and transfer them to online service based business, and that's kind of how this was all born.
You use the word culture, essentially corporate culture. And so many times when people are looking for jobs, they do not think, they do not even ask what the culture is of the company. And that is so critically important. That's a really, I think, valuable point that you've made. So thank you for that. Because I know there are people watching and maybe you're thinking, single mom, let me go get a full-time job. This will be cool. But it's not cool if the culture is so diametrically opposed to who you are as a human being. And
Yeah.
I certainly know that if you are working in a place where you do not feel valued and it's an 8-hour day, it feels like 16. And if you're working in a place where you feel valued and it's an 8-hour day, it feels like 4 hours because you're really enjoying your space. And that's another thing that's really important. And particularly for people, period. But if you're a single mom, seems to me you got a whole bunch of stuff on your plate. You do not need to come home emotionally exhausted. And that's what it sounds like you were doing. So
Mhm.
tell me, if you can, a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, I consider myself an online operations manager, virtual assistant, and business strategist. So a little bit of all those parts, and sometimes functioning separately, sometimes functioning together. I started with exactly what I said. I wanted to, I loved supply chain, and I said maybe I can bring these impactful principles to online service based businesses. I think over the years at this point, it's evolved into, getting way more into business strategy as I started to realize a lot of exactly what powers supply chain, continuous improvement in that model, apply it to anything online, it's the same results. And so that got me excited about strategy because it really gave me a chance to do what I love about supply chain, which is uh, continuously be improving.
It just occurs to me. I mean, you're talking about the really significant changes you made in your life as a result of being a mom. And one of the things that we know, um, for those who are aware of what's called attachment theory, is the value of quality, consistent attachment that the child has to his or her primary caregiver early on. And without that attachment, the child can develop all kinds of ways of attaching, so to speak, and actually wind up in relationships, the tolerance for which has grown out of how they learned attachment early on. And that's a whole nother conversation, it's a whole nother program, but it really sounds like by you put your child first, but you also put yourself first too. And that's another important piece that we often don't think about. And a lot of times parents will say, well, everything I do everything for my child. Okay, well, what do you do for yourself? Well, I don't do anything for myself, it's all for my child. That's not healthy either. And that teaches your child stuff that is not necessarily healthy for your child as well. So it sounds like you really came together in a way that sort of suggest optimum health for you, for your child, for your relationship, and for your business. So personally, I think that's pretty cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What would you
I do, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, please.
I just do want to tag on there that it's been. a journey for anyone watching. It definitely was not a short one for me. This has taken me years, absolutely years, and I want to share that because I want to be real. That you know, I believe that everyone can, you know, learn the richness of life and wisdom, but I think a lot of times we put pressure on ourselves that we're not, here and there, and it's like it takes quite some time. So I'm still on the journey myself. I just had to put that little bit of a tag on
Well, that's a perfect entree to my next question, which is when you decide to make such a significant change, when you decide you want to become an entrepreneur, sounds like you're saying, well, that doesn't happen overnight. Is it important to have a business plan? Is it important to think things out, or should you just sort of like throw yourself in it and hope it works?
there. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say it's absolutely important. I think one of the things at this point in 2025 for us to consider is we don't necessarily need a traditional business plan unless we're specifically looking for funding. What we want to kind of push ourselves into is more of a business strategy, something that's completely actionable, that if we take the time to write, we understand is also going to be a living and breathing art piece, and that it's going to change, but it's there as a reference to get us started, to give us a very step by step plan as to how we're going to take steps into what we're trying to accomplish.
A living, breathing art piece. I would never have put that concept together with entrepreneurship. That's really fascinating. Tell me this, for those who are listening and they're thinking, yeah, I think I might want to start my own business. I am concerned about the time that I don't have with my child. And I'm wondering if there is anything I can do to make that change. What are some thoughts that you would recommend people consider when they're thinking about going out on their own? And particularly single moms, because I know that's a passion of yours.
Yeah. Um, I'd like to say this. I mean, as a single mom, I want to say that having a salary job, having benefits is actually really great. If you have no desire to start a business and you don't like your job, and that that concept of having that solidity sounds good to you, I say go for it. Take the time to take a systematic approach to finding an employer that you like the corporate culture of, that you feel like you can really align with, that's going to treat you well and respect you. Now, I know, and this is for me, I fit into this bucket. There's another bucket of women where, it doesn't matter how good the job is. That does sound great, but I still kind of don't really want to answer to someone when I need to do something for my son or for myself. I want to have that flexibility. And then there's the third bucket, which I also fit into, which is you just want to be a business owner. You want that legacy. You want that, you know, ability to create generational wealth for your child, and be able to pass something along, or maybe you have a completely different motivation, but that's a part of mine. And so if you fall into either one of the buckets where you feel very solid in the idea of I want to start a business, and I'm emphasizing that just to say I don't recommend it for the person who doesn't really want that. I think so much today people try
Yeah.
to market to moms, especially single moms, like start a business, and if you don't want that, don't do it, because it's still difficult. You still need to be systematic, but if you have the passion, what I would say is the first place to start is with your own skills and with your own passions. You want to look at those, assess what you already like, what you're already doing well. Then you want to look at that market and say, where's the problem? Where's the struggle? Where are people being served with my skills and my passions, but they're not satisfied? Or there's a gap where they're not being served at all. And you go in and you fill it.
Daphne, before I let you go, which I'm going to do in about a quarter of a second, uh, is there a way for folks to learn more about what you do, or I believe you have a support group, or can you just very, very quickly give us that information?
Sure, you can reach help at Facebook groups, Moms Helping Moms Start an Online Business, and in terms of my business, DaphneJoseph.com.
Okay, that was pretty short and pretty quick. Thank you so much. And folks, thank you for joining me on this edition of M.E.S.H. As usual, I will be here next week, and I'll be exploring all things relating to your mental, emotional, and social health. You take care, and I'll see you soon.